Hi everybody, it's David Shummy at Fix a Frame in Mount Cravat, and we're here today for our monthly Framers Club broadcast. Anyway, what we're here today to look at is some basic picture frame repair techniques. We are going to look at a simple technique using some readily available things that you can get for doing, say, minor repairs and actually some quite major repairs, but you need to draw a line between whether you're going to repair something using traditional methods, which might involve using composition mixtures, which we'll talk about in a minute, or whether you're okay with going to a modern counterpart or a modern compound to repair an antique frame. So if you're trying to repair something that has antique value and is not just something that has, say, sentimental value to the person you're repairing it for, you may want to make some considerations as to using some different techniques. Those different techniques I will be covering in a later broadcast, and certainly we will look at traditional methods for repairing frames as well. But today we're going to look at some modern ones. So hopefully we're going to run for about an hour, maybe a little bit more than an hour today. As usual, we've got a chat function there. If you need to ask any questions, please just shoot them into the chat. Also, we broadcast in 720p, which is the highest definition we can currently get going out of Australia using what's available for me. Hopefully soon enough they'll get their upload speeds greater here so that we can pump up even better quality. We've started to put in the replays in higher definition back into the members areas, and my graphics guy and video guy has been hard at work re-editing a lot of the stuff just that we've done lately. So we're having a bit of a batch and then we will get them uploaded. Otherwise, you can always access the replay. Sometimes you might be watching this on replay still via the webinar link, but if you're in the members area, eventually that content will be in high definition with our other better cameras. So we've got a high def video camera filming here, and I've got a little one set up here today, so we're going to do a couple of little close-ups on the bench. Oh, great. Thanks. Cindy says we've got sound. That's good. So anyway, there are a few things we're going to run through today with just, I've got a little, it's a metal frame. It's not a wooden frame, although you could apply this to any ornamental frame. It's just I've got to make a repair for this little one. And this method that we're going to look at today is probably the most suitable that I can make for this without going and, say, pouring, say, a metal ornament, or trying to cast, say, a lead ornament or something like that. So what we're looking at is, one, how we can actually take a mold. So this is a little photograph that's in a frame at the moment. It's actually a brass picture frame or a bronze picture frame, and the ornaments there are all metal. And at one point in time this would have either been brass plated, or it looks like it was brass plated because I can see where there are shiny bits of gold there still. I don't think it's ever been a leafed frame. It's just a little pressed metal frame, something that would have been pretty standard fare. You can use what I'm going to show you today. Someone else put some little hangers on here. They've obviously had this hanging up. There are little frame tabs just here that are holding in this metal plate. We're going to take it out and we can just have a look at the frame itself. Now, the technique today that we're looking at is how we make a mold from some of these ornaments that are on there so that we can copy an ornament. I'll also show you how we do, I won't go into too much depth in traditional repair, but I will show you how we do some of the carved positive ornaments when we actually need to make up a design, or if we didn't have the ornament there, So I just want to see if this pops out. This is actually a metal plate. They're actually going to redo this and put an anti-reflective glass into this when it's done. Just want to be a little bit careful. So yeah, I haven't even opened this one up. This was just brought in the other day, and we're going to go through and fix it. So yeah, this you'll find that there are many frames. You might even see them around. There were a lot of frames. They're stamped on the back with the Empire Frame Company, and there must have been a fashion at the time, people doing wedding photos and different portraits and things, that they would have had a standard oval or a octagonal or different shaped frames, and they often had slumped glass in the front of them. This one probably had a little bit of slumped oval glass in the front at the time, but now there is actually an image in here. I think this must be a reproduction that they've put back into this frame, because sitting in here is... This is actually a reprint or a restoration reprint of the original photograph. So this has been mounted on foam. So it has been out of that frame recently, or has been put into that frame recently. But the client's asked to try and replace this ornament that's missing off the side here. So in this example, we're actually quite fortunate because we've got an example of the ornament over here, and we've also got the top and bottom ornaments. So if as long as you've got something where you can make an impression from, or where you can take a copy from, it's relatively easy to fix. If you haven't got an actual ornament there, then normally in the old days, when they would do ornate frames, originally they would carve frames. So the framer himself would spend a lot of time carving wood and then going through gilding that wood, preparing that, and finishing the frame. So it was all solid wood. But sometime, I think in probably the 17th century, late 17th century, they started to experiment with casting and composition frames. And what would happen is they would then make ornaments by mixing up various compounds, and the traditional compound was called compo. And compo was made from rabbit skin glue, and so it's traditional animal-based glue or pearl glue, which was like gelatine. That is boiled in a double boiler, and then on the stove as well you would use rock resin or rosin. And if anybody out there has ever played a musical stringed instrument, the violinist would always put rosin, which was like a clear resin from a tree, onto the string of the bow to actually get some grip to it. And occasionally gymnasts use powdered rosin on their hands to get grip. That rosin or resin is the byproduct of making turpentine. So when you extract the sap from a pine tree, you get that turpentine or that resin coming out of the tree. They would distill off the turpentine, and what was left was the resin or the rosin. Now that rosin itself melts at I'm not sure what the temperature is, but we normally heat it up and melt it in a separate pot. So we'd have a double boiler with the animal glue, another pot with the rosin, and we'll demonstrate this in a future training when we do traditional compo making. And then there's a water and an oil-based mix. So the rosin was mixed with linseed oil, and the animal glue is mixed with water. And so you basically got an oil and water mix, which really shouldn't mix together. But what would happen, you'd heat the resin up, it would be almost boiling, it would certainly be molten. The glue would be moist in the double boiler. You'd add the two together, mix it up, it would foam up quite violently. You were making a hot emulsion, and then to that you added a mixture of basically calcium carbonate or chalk. And There were sometimes some other things in there, but it was getting that proportion right of the right amount of rosin, the right amount of glue together with the right amount of chalk. And that gave you then something that was like a big hot bread dough, although it was very hot, and usually as an apprentice you had to knead that mixture. And so you'd make up batches of this compo, as it was known, and the compo could be left to dry in bricks. And I never really used to let it ever dry to bricks. I would make it into bricks and I'd keep it in the freezer. But most, like in a frame shop, they might make up a batch of bricks of the resin mix, and then they would store those. And when they needed to use it, you then steamed it to bring it back to life. So, you know, the common way is you have a frying pan and you steam compo, piece of cloth over, put water in the frying pan, you can control the boil, and you steam that compo back up to life, and then you're able to make squeeze ornaments from it. So in the traditional sense, they would use a negative carved ornament. So I'll put this on close-up. I'll just check our close-ups are working. What we got here, this is an antique ornament. I'll just bring it up on close-up. So this is actually a negative, so that the ornament is down, carved into the wood. It's actually harder to carve an ornament that way, where you've carved into the wood, than it is to carve a positive. So the difference here is, I'll show you a positive up close. The positive ornament, the ornament's actually sitting up, and we've carved away the rest of the wood, so we've made a positive ornament. Now, if we didn't have an ornament on this oval frame to copy from, we would have to make a positive ornament like this to work from. But we're lucky, we've got an ornament here, so we don't actually have to go and make one. And in fact, if I had to make one for that, I would have taken off the other good ornament, and I would have used one that I already had, rather than try to carve and make a new ornament. But these are basically positive ornaments, and you can go through and carve things like this. Here's another little example. This one on the corner, this is a corner ornament that I've carved on one side of the wood, and on the other side here we have a center ornament for the frame. And so in the example of that, then we used a silicone rubber that we built a wall around this, and we actually made this rubber mold that we've taken from that ornament there. And then we're able to make compound into this, either composition or what I'm going to show you today using a synthetic polymer. So today we're looking at synthetic polymers, and the synthetic polymer it's not really used for picture framing, although people have used various compositions. You notice if you see some of the cheap imported frames from China, Taiwan, Malaysia, Indonesia, they would use things like carbog, which is a fiberglass composition. Now, you can use things like that, but I prefer to use if I'm doing a little repair like this, I prefer to use an epoxy putty. So today we've got a product here in Australia. It's something called Knead It, and it's actually an epoxy putty. We'll look at that when we get to it. So we're going to use some of the epoxy putty today, and also we're using some silicon material. Now this is by a company here called Barnes in Australia, but I'm sure you can get similar products wherever you're based. This is a two-part compound, so we've got basically the silicon material and a catalyst, and the two are going to get put together. Now, before I discovered this stuff, this is actually a silicon putty, and it's really, really good. Like, since I discovered the silicon putty, it has sped up my restoration time when it comes to little things, little jobs like this, quite considerably. In the past, when we were using this one here, where we made the white one, that silicon here would take 24 hours plus to set and harden, and we would be making a mold around this, pouring this liquid silicone in and then having plasticine around that to make a little well, and then once that was set, we would be able to take it off and we'd have a silicone mold. Well, with these silicone putties, you can actually, it'll set really quite quickly. So we're able to knead it up and make an impression really quickly. Some of the other things you can use to do this, in theory, and I have done it in the past, in theory you can do things with plasticine. Plasticine is always good if you need to make just a small ornament. You can always put the plasticine in the freezer to set it up to make it go hard. And that's good enough if you've just got to do one little thing and you want to make a quick copy. You can get away with plasticine. The other thing that dentists use is dental alginate. And that's a derivative of basically a seaweed type gelatinous product, and when they mold teeth and things like that. So, you know, you can always go to a dental prosthesis supplier, and you may be able to get some good molding compounds there. If you've ever seen, like, there's been a craze, maybe waning, but it's still we're quite close to a baby shop here, so we see a lot of people doing hand and feet impressions. And if you're going to do on human skin impressions, you'd want to use some of those medical grade, either medical grade silicones, or I would be suggesting you to use the dental alginate, because that stuff is not going to hurt your newborn's feet as you cast them. Anyway, what the tools today, we haven't got a lot of tools. We've got a few things. I've got some acrylic paint here. I'm going to show you a little bit about how we tell what the ornament looks like. And once we cast it, we actually colour it so that we can see whether it blends in. It's a good way to tell. I've just got a little offcut of foam board here. This is just a self-adhesive one. And I'm going to use this, I'll show you why in a sec, because we've got a little hole under there. So I want to actually put a piece of foam underneath the ornament that I'm making. I've got a little pot of Vaseline. The Vaseline is going to be used as a release agent. So you need to put a coat of a release on so that we don't actually stick the silicone, because silicone will stick to anything. So you need to use a grease to stop the silicone sticking to the mold. In fact, when we do all the castings off all our positives, we cover all of that quite intensely with usually, sometimes even a PVA release compound, which is another type of release material, just so that we don't get any silicone caught on our ornament, because otherwise it both ruins the mold and we then have to clean up the ornament again and go back to carving, which is too intense. So with this one, where the ornament is damaged, and what I'll do is I'll come up into close-up so you can see where we're going. Let's just check this one out. Yeah, I changed the cameras around a little bit today, so we should be able to get some reasonable close-ups on here. So I'll pop that out of the way. So first up, what I've got here, you can see on this side of the frame, the ornament is missing. We're missing from here to here. But on the other side of the frame, we've still actually got a reasonable ornament to work from. So we're going to take a casting from this other side, and then we're going to use the cast from here, and we're going to put it over on this other side. So the way it is, there's actually a few holes. So in that ornament, you can see there are holes that come right through. So we've got to block those holes when we're making the ornament. Otherwise, the silicone's going to go down into the hole, and then it's going to stick to this thing, and it's going to be hard to get it off. So first up, I thought, well, the easy way for me is just to use a bit of the adhesive foam board. So I'm just going to roughly cut a little piece. And the other thing here is that is going to be curved. So maybe I can just flip that upside down. So at this stage, I'm just going to flip it upside down, and actually using a pencil, I'm going to draw that oval. So all I've done, I've just scribed a line, which is a little oval line on this bit of sticky board on the back. And then I'm just going to freehand cut It's become apparent why I'm doing this. You could plug that hole some other way, but I just thought, oh, sticky foam, it's going to be good enough, stick on enough for me to use it as a piece. So I've just cut that to this little oval shape, and that oval shape is going to match underneath here. So that's all we're going to do. We're going to stick it on under there. So I'll take off this adhesive coating. I don't need it all to be all off, but I've just peeled that off. So this is sticky here, and then I'm going to put it up hard up under this ornament and stick it as well as I can. It's a little bit of a different shape, but I'm sure it'll work. So what I've done, which I might even have to hold that while we work, might be that it's still quite dirty. So what I'm doing is I'm sticking that little bit of foam underneath those holes, so it's going to help me get through there. In fact, I'm going to need to put something underneath that, like so. Now then I'm going to come and use a petroleum jelly and, you know, common Vaseline, but this is one that comes with the silicone set, so I use it. A little bit of Vaseline on a brush. This is just a hog's hair brush. We use it for all sorts of things, but there's Vaseline on there. And then I'm going to go over and paint this ornament with Vaseline. And I don't want it, you don't want a huge amount on there, but you do want to make sure that you get the grease into all areas of that ornament. The one thing you don't want is a little bit, particularly down in the hollow, where some of that silicone can stick, because then you've got problems, particularly when you're taking a cast from the actual frame that you're working on. You know, we wouldn't want to damage this frame any further. So I'm putting some grease also on that, around on that foam board and down into the hole there. So it's going to go like so. So step one is sort of getting that ornament greased up so that nothing's going to stick to it. Now what we do next is I'm going to use this this silicone. Actually, it says it's skin safe, so I'll hold it there. You can actually have a look. This is Silpression, and two parts to it. This actually says it's skin safe, so you probably can actually use it to mould human body parts if you want to. And their mix ratio is 100 to 100, so it's equal amounts of each part. So you've got part A and you've got part B. Now, important you don't mix them ahead of time, but I normally have either a little bit of board or sometimes I use a little piece of glass. In fact, I had a bit of glass ready, but I don't see it right there, so I'll just put it out in the middle. So this is and for an ornament like this, you need a piece of composition. Now, this is half. So if you imagine, we're going to use this and another bit like it. So I've just put a little ball out there. And then this other one is a yellow colour. So I'll take a piece of the yellow one. You don't have to mix the whole pot up. And what we do, we basically keep this compound, we keep it in the fridge. So, I don't know, I've had these two pots now for probably going on a year, and they both remain, you know, quite active. Just make sure you put the yellow lid back on the yellow one and the grey one back on the grey one, because you don't want to mix the two up, otherwise you'll set the whole pot up. So yeah, Silpression, that's what we're using here. There may be different brands of that. And there may be something that you can find that is useful for you. So I've got two little lumps just like so, and I've measured, that is my visual measurement to think, okay, well, they're both the same. Now what these do, these both go together, so we just put them together like so, and then we're just going to knead that. So this is a little kneadable putty. I tend to spread it out, and then I fold it in on itself, and we just go kneading. And the whole compound will change colour as we knead that, the catalyst as such into the silicon itself. Now it's quite a flexible material, like this is really, you can feel like it's almost got a drippiness to it, although it is solid. It would start to get warm as it catalyzes and as it sets, so it's a sort of thermic setting process. I haven't had any problems with it being too hot for anything that I've particularly moulded. Once you've mixed it together, you want to sort of end up with a relatively smooth side to it. So here's the back edge, it's a little bit tucked in, but I want that smoothness on at least one side there, so that then I can take it over to my ornament and I can apply some pressure to this and actually mould that entire ornament. So at this stage, I'm just going to put it over gently. Now this is a difference using this stuff. If we'd have to cast this with some of the pourable type silicons, we would be building up little wells around it and all sorts of things to try and stop the silicon from running away. And it makes it a lot longer job if you have to actually go through and do all that sort of extra mould preparation. So for something like this, it's pretty good. Like we can get in, and I'm just going to squeeze that down. I probably could have done with a little bit more. I've got a little bit of a thin section there. Now if you're making big ornaments in this, and this is a little tip, if you want extra strength in your ornament, you can use cloth bandages like your normal gauze bandage, and you would put a piece of gauze bandage into that and apply a bit more over the back, and that way you get some strength. Like on the white one here, it's relatively thick, like I've made this tough, but that's actually used a ton of silicon. That's quite a lot of silicon there. So if we were going to do things we wanted to economize on the silicon, because that is actually quite expensive, we would thin that down quite a bit and use layers of fabric with sort of painted silicon on it to actually bring that up, so that you ended up with the reinforcement of the cloth, and that gives the mould some bulk as opposed to just using masses of silicon. I'll just flick this back over here. So what we've got that composition just or the silicon on there, and I've just squeezed it on. Now this is in real time, so we've got to wait for that to set. Now I don't know what it says on here in terms of setting time. I don't think it actually tells you, but I noticed that that this actually sets like really quickly, like 5 minutes, maybe even quicker than that, and I can feel that that's already getting a little bit harder. So we need to wait for that to set, and then when it sets, we can take it carefully, take it off the ornament. Now we might have little bits, like there's little bits lying around. I just found some pieces from previous jobs, because often there'd be small ornaments like that where we've just got to fix a little bead or a little section, so we just need little bits. And these things are quite good, because you may not, if you're ongoing making ornate frames from scratch. So say, for example, with this one in particular, where I have the corner and the center, I have probably made half a dozen frames with this particular ornament on it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm making all the frames identical, but I've used this central ornament on, say, an oval to replace on an oval frame. I've used it on a small swept frame where I've only used the corners, and on other ones I've used it where I've used the corner and then swept it to the center ornament. So you make multiple uses. Occasionally out of particular ornaments, like we might just only use the scroll. So you know, you need to look, and sometimes a thing like this, like if I was going to use, like this is actually quite a an interesting ornament that we've got on this frame here. If I thought I could use that on something else, I would probably cast this ornament now while I had it here, even though I don't have another oval frame that I could use, because I could then go and use this on a timber frame. And I could use this maybe on a timber frame, not an oval one, but I could use it as a corner ornament. So this would actually even sit as a corner ornament. Some of the floral section, there's a little floral section on both ends there, that could act as two little sort of teardrops if I needed to add flowers to another frame, for example. Now, on this one in particular, I was debating whether to pull the rest of the ornaments off. Like, it's only partially broken in the sections here, and so it could be easier to fully cast a whole new ornament. We're going to try and cast just the pieces that are missing, and we'll have a look at how that works. If we can't get enough reinforcement from where we've actually just casting that bit that's missing, I may in fact take this other piece of ornament off, and that's why I've cast the entire ornament here. And also, this is quite an attractive small ornament that could again be useful for future repairs. So then this one will go into the data bank. And what usually happens, I mean, we have maybe, in terms of carved ornamentation over the years, and I mean it's a lot of years that we've been doing framing now, over the years I've probably collected at least 80 different full frame sets of different sized ornaments, and that might be 80 frame sets where some have 5 ornaments to make up that particular frame design, and there'd be other little components that you just add and you keep, because you never know when you might want to use that particular one to do in something else. So you know, you could use that ornament, doesn't have to be this shape of frame. Anyway, we'll have a look at how that is coming on. That's pretty well set up. I'm going to just come up into close-up again just so that you can have a quick squiz at that. So yeah, this we squeezed on there. Now I'm going to take the back piece off first. So that was our little bit of foam that was underneath. I'll just show you where we've gone from the back. So this is on the back side. So you can see how we've got that compound all around that ornament. And then from the front here, we're now going to just take this off just gently. We come along. Hopefully we haven't stuck it to it. It's little bits. So when you've got little areas where there are returns on it, and what I mean by a return is where there is a hole, there is always a chance that some of that silicone can go underneath the ornament. And on the front here, I think we just got one little bit caught, but there we go, we popped him off. So now what we've got here is a really, really high definition copy of this ornament here. So basically, when we look at it, it's mirrored. I'll show you that up close. So we've got our ornament and our mirrored copy of the ornament, and we're going to use that piece then to cast the section that's going to go over here. So then we're going to be able to put this piece, and you'll see that that should actually, where the old ornament is here, that actually fits that. So that is pretty much this ornament here around on the other side. So we're going to get away with using this one to replace the one that's missing. Now, the stuff that I'm going to use to actually make that the ornament that's going to go in here, some people would use plaster and all sorts of things like that, and also, so I was mentioning before, using the composition. But what I'm going to do today, because this is not a particularly valuable frame, the person has put a reproduction of her grandmother into this frame, and she'd like to maintain the look. So without going to make a metal ornament, we discussed what the options for restoration were, and this option presented the best solution at the best price for what she wanted to do. So this is actually just something called Selly's Need It. So this is and there's bound to be different brands, I don't know where you are, but this is used for repairing. Sometimes it's used for repairing plumbing and different things like that. But basically what it is an epoxy putty. So an epoxy putty, now this is a little sausage of material. And I like this because, again, you could probably get this as it is a two-part material. So usually it has a little silver end on it, and then you peel that off and you work. But we've been working from the other end and someone hasn't put the piece back, but it'll still be all right. So what it is, it's a solid putty, so much like you would use something like araldite or an epoxy resin where you're mixing two components together and it's curing. This is a thicker version, so it's got the outside section, which is I think the actual adhesive itself, and inside it's got your catalytic component. So we need to take off enough of it to fit into this mould. And also, before I'm going to put it in the mould, I would be inclined, again, I've still got some grease on my brush from when I did it before, and there's probably enough grease on here already, but just to be sure, go round into that silicone and make sure that you've got some, working it right in. I'm working right down into it, forcing the brush down into all the little nooks and crannies again, because I want to make sure that that is good for release. So yeah, we greased that one up. That's our little ornament, or our little mould. Okay. Now with this material, with the epoxy putty, what we do is I cut a piece off that. I'll just get a blade. I don't really want to use my Stanley knife to cut that. I just use an old mat cutter blade. So again, this is a 50-50 mix. So as long as you cut even bits, it's designed that way that you cut a section off and you can knead it together. And I need enough to go into that ornament there, which is probably going to be something. This is probably too much, but I think it's better that I have a little bit much than too little. Sometimes it's hard to tell with this stuff until you actually get working with it. So that's better. When I've cut it there, you can see actually what it's like. It's got that grey core and the white stuff around the outside. So we pop that away. Now this is much like the other stuff that we were working with. We're going to knead that together. So we just fold it. And again, this is a really fast setting compound, so you don't have a lot of time to work with this. I like to, you can tell, you know, and the funny thing is, the bigger the amount of this you try to work with, the quicker it sets, because you've got more heat involved in the reaction. So we try to knead that together as quick as we can. Still got to be smooth, so you know, you need to actually work it quite well, otherwise you have lumpy bits in your ornaments, and you don't really want that. So we want to make sure it's nicely worked. I find you can actually use water with this as well. Like, although they say this one's not waterproof, I've got a little jar of water here, and I'm going to dip my finger into that so my fingers are wet. That way I don't really stick to it, and I don't particularly want to stick to it. So they do make a water-based version of this that they use for plumbing, but I've found that I can put water on there without too many problems. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to squeeze it into the mould. Now, I don't know whether you can see that. It's a little bit tricky while I'm doing it. I've got to use both hands on here. But I'm working along from one end, and all I'm doing is I'm pushing it quite hard down into that ornament. Need to make sure I've got enough. Wow, I probably should have made just a little bit more. We'll get there. So I only barely have enough to do this ornament. Often I'd have some left over. But I've slightly misjudged how much volume this one actually takes. It takes a little bit more than I expected. You can see where these yellow bits are coming through here. This is actually where the holes are in the piece. Now maybe that we don't even need that piece there. That is that section on the front here. Get rid of this. What do we got going on? So, wow, some of that ornament is up on the top of the frame. Some of it may be the arch part. So yeah, I might make another one of these, but we'll have a look now. We'll get this bit done. I might pinch that little bit there because I think that is part of the frame, part of the oval, and I want a bit down this end to make that little scroll on the end. Because yeah, some of this ornament, like here, where I'm just taking it off there, some of that ornament comes up onto the frame itself, and some of it, so this section here is actually the oval frame, the bare bones underneath, and this is the ornament that's going to sit on top. So I didn't need to use any material there, I only needed to fill the piece. And so what we've done, we've squeezed that into the mould, like so. Now that's going to sit, this one may take a little bit longer, but it's still quite a quick drying material. Like this is already, I can feel it. You can generally tell, like it becomes quite stiff, and once it started to stiffen up, you really can't be going on with kneading it. Like once it's got to that point of stiffness, you've either got to make the ornament or you have to start again. So let me just have a look. I think we got some questions there. Rob, are these jobs difficult to price? Really, when it comes to pricing restoration, it really is a time thing. So yes, you do have to determine. Usually, they're always underpriced, I might say. In the early days, they would be considerably underpriced because you'd be learning and you'd be trying to develop your skills. But we look at something like this and think, okay, we can actually repair. There is probably, well, you'll see today because I'm doing this repair for you in real time. So on a repair like this, there might be an hour of actual ornamentation and repair and finish. And so depending on what, like we generally have a shop rate. So we know what our hourly rate is. Like if you're ever doing your costing for framing, and it's something that a lot of picture framers, people in, not necessarily with restoration, but with just general picture framing, price things in all sorts of different ways. I would suggest you don't price like what everybody else does. Usually you work out how many hours there are in a year, and in our case there's 2,080 hours that we work, and we want to make X number of dollars profit for that time, plus we know what our cost of materials is, and we know what our labour cost is. And so we basically would have our material costs and our overheads and our labour and our profit, and we work out how much we need to divide up in each hour of time, and then we just have a calculation that we work out for how much time usually we've put into some of these jobs. And sure, sometimes it is sometimes it's like swings and roundabouts. You may lose on something because when you've got into a repair, you may find something else. And often we'll mention to a client that, look, if we find something else that we haven't discussed when you were here, we'll call you. You know, it's a little bit like if a mechanic's fixing your car and, you know, he just says, oh, I'm just going to change the oil. But actually when he gets in there, he discovers that, you know, all your valves are gone or something. And so he's got to put all these things in. We're pretty transparent when it comes to how much time is involved, and really that's all you can do. You offer people the service and explain that's what the cost would be, and then it's up to them to determine as to whether they would like you to go ahead with that job. I do remember in the early days we repaired a huge, and I mean we're talking. Well, it took two of us to move the thing around all the time, and we had to recast, and we didn't expect it when we started. We looked at this job and we thought, oh, this is not going to be too much work. But basically the entire frame, and it was 6 foot by 5 foot, and the moulding was about 8 inches across. It was a big, huge ornamental frame. And all of it was ornamented, but when we got into it, it had been made with plaster and horsehair, and the horsehair is used to bond the plaster together to give it strength, but it had broken down in places. So when we were actually trying to start repairing, we realised, oh, it would be better to take off, you know, there were bits that we could patch and still leave the old stuff, but the old stuff wasn't very sound. And, you know, it appeared sound when we started, but then when we got into it, we realised, oh, look, this is not working. And we actually spent about 3 weeks, and I mean, I'm talking, at the time I was fortunate, I had a trainee on with me who was very, very keen to learn ornamentation. And so I really wasn't paying a full labour rate to actually do that job. Otherwise I would have really been in a hole. And it was fantastic. And casting ornaments, there was about 3 weeks full-time work for the trainee going through casting and copying ornaments. And then there was about 2 or 3 days of gilding work on top of that at the end. And really, it's more, I go back, I can still see that frame hanging in one of the big galleries, and I look at it and I think, oh, what did I do? You know, because we did that for you know, it was a silly price at the time, but a very, very good lesson as to what your time is really worth. So yeah, it's a little bit tricky, but I would suggest the same sort of thing. It's the same with any framing job that, and picture framing generally, and you may be doing framing for your own pleasure, you may be doing it for business, but picture framing is generally a luxury item, so there is slightly more flexibility over price with certain things. You know, sure, all the everyday budget poster type normal things, that market has been eroded by, say, Chinese imports and also cheap things that are available, and you know, the big box retailers having things that are actually super competitive. So really in the custom area, you really need to be in that doing work like this or doing things that are more intensive, because those sorts of things, there is more price flexibility, and certainly there is more room for profit in something where the materials in this job are not particularly expensive. Like we might be using, you know, I mean, the silicon is expensive when you have to go and buy the big tubs of it, but the amount of material we've used here in this one ornament might only account to less than $1, and yet when we've put it onto here and fixed the whole thing and put some new glass in and put everything on it and everything's all done and it's gold again and everything looks fantastic, it might be $250 or $300 as a finished item. So there's not a lot of material cost, a little bit of time, a bit of skill to get it together. So anyway, this is sort of set. It's not really set. I'll come up and show you because it's a little bit flexible still. And flexible is not bad. So sometimes I like it when this has got us this this flexibility, because this ornament here, we wait for the camera to get a little bit acclimatized to what I'm showing you. This is still a little bit bendy, right? But that's good. Like if I can get into this, I can peel this back. See how I can just crack that little ornament there? I'm not cracking the ornament itself, but I'm getting the silicone off around the edges here. So while it's still a little bit flexible, this is good because then I can just pop that out of there. If it's stiff, I don't want to break it, but it also might help when it comes to putting it on to the frame if there's a little bit of flexibility there. So just, you can see it's coming out, a little bit stuck here. Again, you can use, like I've got little spatula like this if I need to get into here, just to work that ornament up. Don't really want to, when it's still soft, you don't really want to damage it. We don't want to put any extra impressions in there, so I don't like to use metal unless we have to. Now, here is our little ornament. So she's actually just delicate there. There's a little bit here you can see hanging over that is excess. So while I've actually got that, and I'll do it on, just wonder if I've got a little bit of a dark thing I can show it. It's always hard when I show you guys on the white. Just getting a bit of something out of the bin so that I can, just a little bit of scrap cardboard here because it's a little bit easier on the camera when we have something that's not white. But what I would do here is where I've got this little section, can you just see here? This actually is overrun on the ornament. So I'm going to use this knife, but often we'd use a little scalpel. I'm going to just cut. While it's still fresh, it's still quite easy to cut. When this is set, this is a really tough epoxy, so it's not easy to cut it after it's set up. So you want to get rid of any bits like that. So I'm just cutting that there. So can you see how I just cut? What I did is I cut that little piece off that was stuck on the outside of that ornament there. It was in that piece. And then, whoop, there are some little lumps, and I can actually just take the knife and just come in and just take those pieces off. And again, do that while it's quite fresh. It's not hard to do. If you've let it set up, you may need to use a file or some sandpaper to remove those pieces. But when it's still quite fresh like that, you can just use a knife. Now, that little bit there in the front, that is actually part of the ornament. And now this would go, and just see if we can have a look at that. This is going to go here on the frame when we put it together. So that part right up to here is actually good. So you can see when I hold it here, we'll hold it up close so you can have a look. So you can see the bit that is still good on the old frame and the bit where I've actually recast the whole thing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut it right through that little ball there, or not around that little ball or that little bud. So just I'll put it down, you can watch me cut it on there. I'm just going to cut that off. It's quite brutal because the ornament is actually quite nice, the whole ornament. But I don't really need that piece. So I've just cut it through there. So what's going to happen is this piece is going to come and go onto that section there. So all I've done is I've cut off this piece, which was the other piece on the piece there, and then that's going to fit up hard against there like so. So the other piece that's already there is this ornament on the end here. So I can get rid of that section too. So I'm just going to hold it on the frame, And I'm going to take a little cut just through there. That's where I want to cut it. I put a little mark there, and now I'm going to put it back down onto the table. We cut that through there. So I've cut off 2 sections now off this ornament. So I cut the tail piece off there and the other piece. So now that is going to fit up against these 2 sections. Now I need to take a little bit more off this ornament here, so that I've got to cut it around that way, so that I can squeeze it up hard against that. That's going to sit quite nicely there. We need to take a little bit more off this one. So now that's fitting reasonably nicely with where we'd anticipate that going. So that would go on there. Now to get that to hold on, we'd either use something like we'd put a little bit of wire through that section. I think just we may have lost the chat on the feed here, so don't worry. If you're still with me, please just watch it, and then if you need to chat to me later, we can talk about this at a later stage. But this is going to fit up hard on here, and what I'll do is I'll do a replay of this at a later stage so you guys can get the whole of it. So this is going to sit up in here. Now I'm going to use the same material, so getting back into the epoxy putty again, I'm going to take a little section of that epoxy putty. We're going to cut through a little piece, and we're going to use the epoxy putty this time as the adhesive that's going to help hold this whole ornament together. So what's going to happen, we come in and we knead that up, and this time we're going to use a little bit on the back of the frame itself. So we've got to put some on the ornament, and the reason I put a little piece on the ornament is it tends to stick better if we've got something there to start with. So that little piece on the back of that ornament is what's going to help stick to this part of the frame, and I'm pushing on to the frame a small piece of that epoxy. And I also want to use some where this other ornament was over here. So we need to get a little bit of epoxy and work it onto the frame itself. And I'm going to put a little bit under here too. Like what's going to end up happening, I need to bridge the gap from that section through into the next piece. We'll just have a little look at where it's going to go. So we can also put some here. And again, got to be reasonably quick with working with this now because it will set up quite quickly. We're going to get that on there. Get that onto the frame. Get that onto the ornament on that side. And I might want to use a little piece of it right in to the actual join on the front of it. And so even though we're joining here, we're joining metal to the epoxy piece, and underneath here, I'm coming onto the back now, and what I'm doing, I'm putting a piece here, and I'm going to push it up to that ornament, because I want to provide support and provide bonding at the point where it's joining that break. So we can always finish this back section off so you won't actually see the damage. We can take that section, cut it off. But what I've done is I've pushed some up into that little join. And also I'm just going to make sure that I've got the hole still happening. So we want to get that ornament happening there. And likewise, we want to get some of this material, preferably across that join. If we can get some here, it'll help with securing it. This will set up quite firm. Sorry, I'm trying to work on a section there you may not be able to see, but I'm trying to get some in here. I'm just working into the back of it because I want that to hold there. Then this last little bit, I've got a bit left. I'm going to put it on here. And again, I'm forcing it somewhat up onto that piece that we'd remolded. So it's spread up onto it. And also I'm making sure it's bonded quite firmly to the frame. So hopefully you can see that in there. I want to just check from the front. Sorry, that's a little bit awkward. Because it's on the angle that I want to hold it on slightly differently. So in here, I just want to work that piece. I've got a little bit of putty just coming through that join. And I want to smooth it over because it'd be nice. It's much easier to work with this when it's still wet than after you've actually got it in a dry, or when it's dry, you know, then you've got to sand and all sorts of things. And sanding is far harder to do than it is to just actually work that quite nicely while you've got it in that wet state, or unset state I should say. So I've still got a few seconds left in this before it's going to harden up on me. So I'm going to work a little bit into that front join. That's going to hold that end quite nicely there. Just smooths it off nicely. This other piece, we're going to smooth that around. We don't need that hanging over. And so what I've done is I've mounted that piece on there quite well. There's still a little bit here. I'd like to get something into that. But if it's set, and this is the thing, if it's already set up and you can't get to it, you're better off making a new batch of putty up and just coming along at a later stage and having another go at filling the gap that you need to fill. Because once it's gone past its setting time, it's not easy to work. But that's sitting quite well. So what you can see here, I'll get this out of the way. So what you can see here is we've actually got the ornament replaced hard up. Well, so I don't know whether we can get the definition there. Now this is the other thing that I wanted to show you today, was not so much once we've actually put that ornament into position like that, it's not easy to tell how good that repair is until we've put some colour on. And by colour, I mean we're going to colour it eventually to be like the rest of the frame, but to see what it's going to look like, we really should mix up something. And what I'm going to use to just put some colour there is a little bit of acrylic. So I've just got some burnt umber. This is just Atelier acrylic. This and that's just burnt umber colour. I'm just going to put a little bit of that, and eventually we're going to put a little bit of gold or something on there that's you know, a little bit of colour to try and match the old bronzy look before we probably go through and try and gild this or make it look like it did before. But at the moment we want to actually get it so that it's a little bit like what is there at the moment. So if anything, it's a slightly little bit greenish. So I'm just putting a little bit of umber and a little bit of, I've just put a couple of little bits of paint on a plate there, and I'm just going to mix these up. And this is just so that I get a sort of bronzy kind of yellow, dark bronzy yellow colour there. You can see that colour. And this is similar to what's on here. Now, this probably will set a little bit more, but I want to put some on now so that you can see where this repair is going, because then it will match the bronze that's there. It always helps if you've actually coloured the thing you're working on. Now, when you're doing work with gold leafing and things like that, when you're sanding things, often you'll use charcoal, powdered charcoal, and that powdered charcoal enables you to grey the area, and it allows you to see where you've got to sand more or where you've got to work more. And this is the same sort of principle that I'm using here. By applying colour to this repair, I'm getting it to the point where I can actually see it as it would look more like when it was going to be finished, as if it was bronze itself. And then we can get working on the actual final coloration. But we need to be able to have something that's going to give us a bit of an indication as to what it's going to look like, and is it going to do the job well enough for what we need. Otherwise, we've got to go back and work it again to try and get that looking right. So sorry, I just painted that up out of camera sight there for a sec. I was just painting the back of it, so I went around here, painted all the back of that so that it's all a bronzy kind of colour, and I've painted the front so that it is a bit of a dirty bronze colour. And what that'll enable us to do, and you'll be able to see now, so here we've got an ornament. It's still wet, so yeah, it's maybe not as easy as once it's dry to see the full finish, but we'll get a bit of a tone down into those lowlights. Yeah, so there's a little bit of colour there. You can see that, compare that with the ornament on the other side. So that's actually the real bronze ornament on the other side of the frame. I'll flip it back around, and here's the one that we've repaired before we've actually put any gold to it. So it's still a little bit like it's still very wet. Like you're not going to get the full effect of it until we've actually gone in and finished it. But the first step is really putting that tone on so that you can match partly the base tone that is happening in the piece, because otherwise you couldn't see what was going on there. Now, this frame actually has a little bit of other damage. Just the ornament's not damaged, but just up in here, it's coming off. It's mounting in that position. So I'm thinking that we might, while we're waiting for that other piece to dry, what I might do is just use another little bit of epoxy just in that section, just to try and put that back on, because that will save work later on if we've got to go in and repair more. So tiny little bit of epoxy. Again, just going to knead that up, and we'll put it underneath that section. So yeah, I think we lost our feed on that one. But I will check back and get the full video up for you guys as soon as possible. So then where this one is actually missing a little bit, I want to put a bit underneath, so we can put some in underneath that, put a piece underneath that leaf. going to push it down, and it's going to spew out and look a little bit odd for a while. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold that so that we can hold that until that epoxy starts to go off, because maybe, just maybe, that would be enough putty there to get that strength required in that little bit of ornament. In fact, I'll put the rest in up on the back end of it. And again, these pieces will sit back in the area where you won't actually see. And I've put another one, sorry, I've been out of view there. I've put another piece up in here. So just a little section underneath, and I've just worked that up into it. And that piece on the end there, I put this piece here, which I've just forced up into that section to hold it. So again, you could, silicone is actually quite tolerant of heat. It is possible that we could cast these ornaments back into, say, a lead casting if we had to, but in this case the epoxy is going to do the trick. So with the other one, that's drying down nicely now. In fact, it's just drying off. I'm just going to, I'll flick them back over here. Yeah, well, what we'll be doing is we'll compile those two, because I think we lost a few of you guys when we dropped out. So they'll both come back together into one video. Just blowing that one, because what I'd like to do is have that, I'm just still holding this other piece. I'd like it to hold it just until, yeah, that's setting up nicely there. So I'll hold that until it's set. I just want to bring it up to the high def camera, just to have a bit of a look on where it is there. So hopefully we can see how that one's working, and you can see the other ornament, and I'm just fixing the top section by holding it there at the moment. So that's actually pretty good. And I think on our good overhead cam, we get a good shot of how that ornament's coming together. Now I'm just going to hold that. And while I'm holding that, I'll flick us back onto just close up. But this section's still wet. But what I want to do, I'm just going to use a little bit of a gold acrylic, a micaceous pigment gold. And what that will do, that will give us a simulation of what the bronze finish would look like. And that way we'll get a really good feel for this ornamentation, to see how we've come close. The gold's going to be a little bit brighter than what is on here, but then I'll knock it down with some of that umber just to bring the colour back down again. So yeah, with the gold, take a little bit of the gold and a little bit of the umber together. So it's going to knock it down to be a little bit bronzier than just the bright gold. And then we can bring it up on the ornament itself. It's going to come around into there. It's very, very much like what is there. And in fact, I might take it through a little bit just onto the highlights, because I don't really want to go through and make this whole frame gold. It would be nice if it just had that still aged feel to it. And so just in some of these areas we're going to keep it quite bronzy looking. Just colour matching. I think that's set up. Yeah, that's good. So yeah, we'll just have a quick squeeze. yeah, so what I've been doing is colouring this one here and some of the other frame areas by mixing a little bit of the umber tones that we had with a little bit of a rich gold. And what that does, that keeps that bronzed out. You know, there's still quite a lot of the copper tones running in that old ornament. And then what I'd done here was I was holding this one down just to get it to set up. It's still just got a little bit of work to go on that. So yeah, sorry, I just out of... Yeah, probably rushing a little bit on those sections. And then this one here is actually the ornament on the other side. So what I'm going to do, just bring a little bit of that bronze just into it, because I can come through. And again, I don't really want to take the finish or change the finish that's on there too much, because they're expecting it to just look like it did. They're not expecting it to be a bright, shiny, new gold. So all we're doing is going and putting a little bit of the bronze tone down. Some of the ornaments will still have that brown down in them. It's going to look quite good. So yeah, actually it's fairly dry brush this. I'm not trying to get a full cover of any colour as such onto it. I'm just trying to even up a few of the areas where there's a little bit of discoloration. A little bit of dust actually. Probably should have dusted this off quite a lot. Still trying to hold that that ornament in place, because that is just setting up there. And then when that's set, what we'll do is we'll take a little bit of, you can see the, if you look closely here, you can actually see a little bit of the white of the epoxy hanging out on that ornament. And what we'd like to do is just take that down so that you don't see that. Now that could be cut off. So cut it off a little bit, and then any other little bits that just hang out there, I'm going to come in and put a little bit of colour on. So a little bit of the umber, just a little bit of umber on there. And in fact I've diluted that down with the a little bit of the gold to it, so that it's just going to blend in with the back tone in that ornament. We don't want it looking like there's anything been done there. It's just to try and tie through some of those new areas where we've just put something there to hold it, and we don't want to do anything that's going to take the age off there. So just blending it a little bit. Now that is pretty good for just where we're at. Like if we have a bit of a look, that frame, I'll just hold it at that angle. So what we've got on this side over here, this is the ornament. I can see just a little bit sticking out underneath. I'm just going to put a bit of colour just down into there. It's like when I look at it, you look at that particular ornament and you think, well, which one is the one we just made and which is the original one? And what we've got here, well, I'll try and get it in camera shot. So this one here is the original one that we took our cast from. So there's our little yellow cast that we took from there. And then what we've done is we've recast it and we've put it on this side over here. So both sides. Now that's still wet. The colour in there is wet, but I just wanted to blend it in so that you could have a look at how that that tone tied in. So what we've done, we could go and actually totally, we could go and totally gild that. I'll just come up into here so we can have a look. We could go and totally gild that frame, but I think what we'll probably do is we'll just leave it like that. It'll actually work quite well, just leaving it in that format, and trying to not really make it any newer than that. And in fact, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get a little bit more work going on this one so that we get it to balance down nicely. Balance down nicely with the old ornament. So that might involve using a little bit of tone on the old one just to bring it down to the level, and using a little bit of gold on the other one to bring it up to the level, because that is actually a pretty good look for a fairly quick repair. So what I'll do is I'm going to leave it there, because I think we've run for a little bit of time there. And what I'll do is I will get this up into the members area, so anybody that's watching this, you'll be able to pick up the high definition version. Sorry, I'll pop him back onto the other camera. I think me talking into the air there for a sec. Yeah, so what's going to happen, this will be available in higher definition inside the members area. We've got some backup footage on our high def movie camera here, and also on a little close-up cam that we got up on top. So I'll be able to go through and put this on. If you've got any questions, please shoot me an email. I know most of the people on this call today are Framers Club members. There's a couple, like normally when someone has just joined my basic training class, I normally invite them to one or two of these so that they can see what goes on in the more advanced training that we do. And if you're one of those people and you actually want to join, there should be a join button somewhere on the page here. Otherwise, hop on over to framersclub.com and sign up. Each month, I'm here to train you in different framing techniques, from beginners right the way through to advanced. Today has been a little bit of a grounding on how we do ornamental frame repair. And this is on some very basic starting point using this metal frame actually. Yeah, we repaired that using a silicon impression and some epoxy putty composition to make up the ornament, and the result has been really quite good for a simple repair like that. In future training, I will take you through how we make traditional composition and how to do it. And then as we progress, and in fact, if you're serious, you can always get on the early bird list for Master Framer Academy. Master Framer Academy will take in-depth training further to what is like a diploma level of training here in Australia. And we'll cover things where you actually learn about those different more technical areas, some of the composition ornaments that are required for repairing antique frames. And also, even if you had to carve picture frames, like there are, not that every picture framer is going into framing to do that intensive work, but it is good to have an understanding about how they're made and how they're repaired. So if you come across something, you recognise that even though you may not be able to do that work, you're able to identify what could be done, and then that person could find professional help to actually to fix their frame. So if there's any other questions, you're going to have to leave them in the email chat box today, because we lost our live chat. But next month we'll be back here, same time. Hopefully I'll squeeze in another one in the interim, because I'll try to make this one up to you. We had a little bit of a tech issue there with our power going down actually, and so the footage dropped out for a sec while I had to hit the trip switches and things. So, all being well, we'll be back with you next month. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. We've added some more video content and some more links up into the members area. Let me know if there's any extra content that you need, if there's things that you're lacking on. I know Cindy'd asked earlier, she didn't ask me in the chat here, but she'd emailed me about stretching silk. Someone had stretched some silks with sharp pins and left some marks. It's really tricky to get that out, Cindy. So you know, if you need to remove, you know, you could remove those pins, but you may find that you still get those stretch marks where the silk has been pinned to. Often in those circumstances, it may be that it has to be laced to the backing and no pins around the exterior. That sometimes helps with that kind of mark. I know the mark that you're talking about. Or alternatively, you may need to bring a mat board or something in, if you can, over some of that edge to alleviate some of that mark. But anyway, we can discuss that further. I'll shoot you an email. And yeah, so thank you very much for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you next month in the regular Framers Club broadcast. And if you need to get me anytime, shoot me through an email from inside the members area, or you can contact me at contact@fixaframe.com.au, and that's fixaframe.com.au. And I'll try to get an answer to you about any of your framing questions. So I look forward to seeing you next time.